The Gospel of Luke is for me, as for many, a wellspring of mercy. Jesus of Nazareth is presented in this Gospel as the embodiment of the compassion and the tender mercy of our God. For Jesus, mercy was indeed a way of life. We hear the sight-impaired and the sick crying out to him for mercy, usually in the language of liturgy, Lawson. We read of his gut-felt, merciful responses to suffering and loss. Truly gut-felt. The words that are used there derive from the Greek splankna, which means literally bowels or entrails or guts. We'll come back to that. We hear him telling us across the ages to become merciful as God is merciful. And there's another word for mercy there. And that's the theme of the Year of Mercy. That saying is the theme that Pope Francis chose. We listen again and again to the Lucan parables of mercy and compassion. It is no exaggeration to assert that leaving and making space for mercy is a preoccupation of the Lucan Jesus. In all of this, we find echoes of the rich biblical tradition of mercy, mostly of rachamim and chesed, but also of chen, grace and graciousness, and of chamal, that verb that we found in Exodus chapter 2, used of the Pharaoh's daughter. In this slot, we have time to explore again just one story, this time a Lucan story, the story of a certain person, and I'll come back to that, who took a difficult and dangerous 25-kilometre journey and who ran into serious trouble. This time we might hear the story, this well-known, familiar story, through the filter of Pope Francis's call to mercy in the Jubilee Year of Mercy. And we might take time to see and understand what's going on here through the lens of Earth's distress as presented to us by Phil. The story is found in 6 short verses of Luke's Gospel. In Luke 10, 30 to 35, but it needs to be heard within its Gospel context. The verses which precede the story and the verses which follow. So as a whole, Luke 10, 25 to 37. There are no female characters mentioned in this text, but if you listen and read carefully, however, you may find them beneath the surface of the text as part of both the human and the other than human communities represented here. I remember saying to some students once, a group of teachers actually, there are no women mentioned in this text, and one of them said, "What about the robbers?" So we might pick that up. And somebody else said, "And what about the animal?" So I said, "Yes, and we might pick that up too." So there are contenders for female characters. First of all, I invite you to pay attention to the structure of the text, in particular to this repeated question, answer, response pattern that you get twice. You get the lawyer's question, Jesus' question. The lawyer's answer, Jesus' response. And then the same pattern again. The story, maybe we'll pick that up, sorry. Just look at that in a little bit of detail. First question, the lawyer's question. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. So it's not a friendly question, it's a hostile question. And it's somebody versed in the law, versed in the Jewish law. And he addresses Jesus as teacher. Rightly so. Jesus proves to be a good teacher who doesn't answer the question but throws it back. It's not a faith-filled address, but there's a sense in which it's right. Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? This guy thinks you have to do something in order to inherit. Jesus asks a question in response to a question, what is written in the law? What do you read there? And that's respectful. That's a really respectful response. What is written in the law? A respectful response to somebody who is trained in the law. And he allows him, and he allows him to answer it. And he knows that he's literate in a population that was largely illiterate. So it's a respectful response. And of course, the lawyer knows the answer. He has the right answer. And he quotes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, adds a little bit, and from Leviticus 19. But Jesus does not say, do this and you will inherit eternal life. Jesus says, do this and you will live. And there's a difference. The next series of question, answer, response. We find the lawyer somewhat embarrassed, I think, conscious that he's been outwitted. And so he asks this further question, and who is my neighbour? It's a legal question to which he presumably knows the answer, namely that for a Jew, the neighbour is another Jew. And this time, Jesus responds with a story that ends with a question. So we have question. And the question is, which of these three do you think was neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of the bandits? And again, Jesus puts the lawyer in the position of having to answer his own question. And the answer is the one who showed him mercy, eleos, the most frequently used word for mercy in the whole of the Christian scriptures. And it's cognates, it's related verbs, and the noun eleemosune, which is, I don't want to detour, but it's usually translated as almsgiving, but more properly translated as works of mercy, it seems to me. So the one who showed mercy is the answer, and Jesus replies, go and do likewise. Now, I'd like to go back to the story, the second question there, and the story that Jesus tells. It's a mercy story that elicits the answer, the one who showed mercy. So we'll take the text. A certain person, an anthropos tis, was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of bandits who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. So we'll just take that little bit. A certain person. I didn't notice that till recently. I always thought it was a man in the Greek. And I, very recently, looked at the text again and found that it was a person. And I said to an adult group that I was working with, does that make a difference to you? And there was a woman who put up a hand and said, yes, it makes a difference to me. I don't have to enter the text by a side door and understand that it might have reference to me and to women. That the fact that it's a person, a human person, makes a difference. And I thought, yes, and that's how I see it too. So often we have to come in from the side door, as she put it. Now, I don't for 1 minute think Jesus was telling a story about a woman. It would be unthinkable. I mean, it's unthinkable enough that this certain person was going down there without any protection, going alone, walking down that very dangerous place where the bandits, the armed bandits, you know, robbers is a very benign description for these people, man who fell among the robbers, very benign, because they were armed outlaws. And look what they did. They stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Who is this man? The story presumes that he's Jewish, because he would be identified. I know, with my Lebanese, Syrian and maternal ancestry, I often get into taxis in Sydney and I engage the taxi drivers in conversation more often than not. And some of them tell me that all the problems in Sydney derive from the Lebanese who live in the western suburbs. And so then I tell them that they're on dangerous ground. But if you're different, if you're a little bit different, then you might be identified. If you're not, then you're a certain person. You're a certain person. You're not identified as an Indigenous person or as a Lebanese person or as a Samaritan in this case, or some other person. So we can presume this person is a Jewish person. Now by chance, and it seems to me it was by chance, because going down that road, when he saw him going down, it wouldn't happen very often. You know, a lot of the priests lived in Jericho, and they did service for 2 weeks in the year, and so like the coming together of these events, of the priest coming down, the Levite coming down, is probably by chance. And Amy Jill Levine, Matthean scholar, New Testament scholar, but Jewish New Testament scholar, all confirms that, and she, at least that's her position on this. She also has something else to say, which I'll mention at this point. She says that Christian interpreters often pit Christianity against Judaism in their interpretation of this passage, and she says there are no legitimate grounds for doing this, since number one, Israel also had laws to protect strangers in their midst, and ritual purity is not at stake in the failure of the priest and the Levite, since they were coming away. Some interpreters say that they had to pass by, otherwise they would have had to go back and purify themselves. She says that's not at all the case. And there were laws around welcoming the stranger, being good to the stranger, being compassionate and caring of those who were not of their own tradition. So, let's just move back a little bit. Until recently, this Lucan passage was known as the story of the man who fell into the hands of robbers or bandits, and as I said, members of an armed gang. And so we're talking about Jesus as a Jew speaking to Jews about a Jewish person physically assaulted and abandoned by outlaws, and that was a frequent enough occurrence in places such as the Jerusalem-Jericho road. The priest and the Levite in this situation fail in their responsibility to assist a seriously wounded person lying by the side of the road. Now, we move on from the priest and the Levite to somebody else who comes along, a Samaritan. Now, just to get our heads around that, let's see what the book of Sirach, a late Old Testament work, has to say about the Samaritans. 2 nations my soul abhors, and the third is no people, the inhabitants of Seir and Philistia, and the foolish nation that dwells in Shechem, the Samaritans. Even in John's Gospel, we find the Samaritan woman saying to Jesus, how is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Jews do not share things in common with Samaritans, says John's Gospel. So it's the Samaritan who sees with the eyes of compassion and is moved with compassion. Esplankniste, you can see splankna in there, guts, moved in the depths of his being. It's about the closest expression we get to the verb that derives from rechem. It's racham, to be moved to have womb compassion, but it's a verbal form. And this word doesn't have the female connotations. Now look what he does. He is an agent of mercy and compassion, and he draws on earth elements as instruments of compassion. Look at them. He bandaged the wounds. Now, he doesn't say use bandage, but he bandaged them with something. So fabric becomes an instrument of mercy. The oil and the wine become instruments of mercy. His own animal, his domestic animal, which has a name, becomes an agent of compassion and mercy. Brings him to an inn. Took care of him. He stays overnight. The coins, these denarii, the coins of the occupier become instruments of compassion and mercy. Gives them to the innkeeper. The innkeeper and all those at the inn. Inns were dreadful places. Just read The Golden Ass by Apuleius if you want to know what an inn was like in that world. But he's cared for there. And he says, there's an open check. Take care of him when I come back. I think there's a relationship already established. This story presupposes a movement. I think that this Samaritan is depicted as a folk healer. He has bandages. Some people say he was a merchant. He'd have more than 2 denarii if he were a merchant. He has oil. He has wine, elements of healing, also elements that are used in sacrifice. He understands the true meaning of sacrifice. So they're coming from Jerusalem, from the Jerusalem temple. This man understands what sacrifice means, what giving one's life means. So take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend. It goes way beyond what might be expected of anyone. He's had a visceral response, a gut response to the suffering of this man, and he carries through. He doesn't just do a little bit. He carries through, and he comes back. At many levels, this is a story of right relationship. It reminds us that everything and everyone is precious, that nothing and no one should be thrown away. You know, we talked about throwaway culture, throwaway people, throwaway societies. So it reminds us that as a human community guilty of exploiting the goods of the earth, it reminds us to draw on earth elements with reverence and respect, to use only what is needed to sustain a wholesome quality of life for all, and thus to ensure that earth's bounty is not exhausted by our human-centered throwaway behavior. The story ends with the question that Jesus puts to the lawyer: which of these 3 do you think was neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of the bandits? While the lawyer refuses to utter the word Samaritan, he gets right to the heart of the matter, the one who showed him mercy. Now, this Greek word for mercy carries all the power of the steadfast, enduring love and womb compassion and liberating impulse of the God of Israel and of Jesus of Nazareth, the embodiment and human face of the God of mercy. To go and do likewise is to leave and to make the kind of space for mercy that Pope Francis talks about. It's to live in the mercy of God or to embrace mercy as a way of life. Thank you.